growth on many, many fronts. It's not only climate change, it's depletion of other resources, it's depletion of fresh water aquifers, it's habitat destruction, especially as China and other food importing countries or feed grain importing countries raise demands for feed grains that then are met by pushing the forest margin aside to increase the amount of land area in the Amazon, for example. So this interconnected world has also meant an intensification of environmental risks. The implications of all of this help to translate into a growing, dramatically growing income and wealth inequality in the United States. It wasn't only market forces that did this, but it was the interaction of market forces, political response to those market forces, like the race to the bottom, and then each country's own accidents of history, because those also play a role. And in the United States, we were in a historical turning point from the New Deal dominated politics from the 1930s to the late 1960s to a southern U.S. dominated or Sun Belt dominated politics starting in the 1970s. Politics shifted to a more conservative part of the United States. When you add up the market forces, when you add up the race to the bottom, when you add up the shifts of U.S. politics, especially the demographic and economic rise of the Sun Belt, which is historically America's most conservative region, this meant that both politics and economics were pushing towards wider and wider income and wealth inequalities in the U.S. Final twist was what's happened to our politics, our political system. For a lot of reasons that I'll describe in summary form in just a few minutes, the corporate lobbies were emboldened and empowered by these changes to take over a very large part of the public policy process. And we have now what I regard as a corporatocracy rather than a true functioning democracy. The power of the corporate lobbies in key sectors of our economy, whether it's the financial sector, big oil, big coal, the private sector, health insurers, the arms industry, is so powerful that American public policy hardly responds to public opinion anymore. And these powerful corporate interests play their role in significant part by paying for the campaigns of the Congress and the White House. Both parties are profoundly implicated. Politicians of both parties spend most of their time raising money these days. Our campaigning is round the clock, all the time, all calendar year. You've noticed that we're deep into the presidential campaign right now. Immediately the day after the midterm elections ended, and the midterm elections began the day after the 2008 presidential elections ended. It's constant campaigning, zero governing. David Plouffe is our president now because he runs the opinion polls, he raises the funds. The president responds to the demands of re-election. And in a corporate-driven society, those demands are not being made by the public, but they're being made by the providers of the $1 billion that President Obama plans to raise for his re-election campaign. $1 billion is not easy to come by. It requires a lot of work. You have to be very friendly with Wall Street. And with the health insurance industry, and you can't afford to pick fights with major interests. And once you're in that mode, we can no longer solve our problems. And that, I think, is the dynamic that we have fallen into in this country. So I want to elaborate on that and then bring us up to understanding the story of the last few weeks and ask at the end, partly rhetorically and partly non-rhetorically, what we can do about it. So let me just run through some of the data to give you a sense of what's happening. These are the adjusted salaries of workers with different levels of educational attainment. At the bottom is without a high school diploma. Oh, this graph is mislabeled, sorry. At the top is, sorry, that couldn't quite be true or we'd all close down the university. It may be true and it may be coming to that. I promise you that this is actually bachelor's degree. And we'll actually get this properly labeled. This is what's called an associate degree, some college or a 2-year community college degree. This is this is an advanced degree. This is bachelor's degree. This is some college. This is a high school diploma. And this is not having attained a high school diploma. And what you can see is that the only gains of income over a period that stretches back from 1975 till now are at the college and advanced degree levels in our country. For those without a high school diploma, this has been a period of falling into deeper poverty. A high school diploma also has meant a falling real income over a period of basically 35 years. This is a stunning phenomenon for a country that is experiencing economic growth throughout this period. All of the income rise has gone to the top. When you put it in this way, all of the income rise has gone to households with high educational attainment. If I put it a different way of looking at the percentile income levels, then you would see that all of the gains came to the top quintile, the top 20%, and almost all of the gains within that came to the top 1% of households. So this is, I believe, the phenomenon of globalization at work, plus its exacerbation through domestic politics. Here's part of that exacerbation. This is the ratio of CEO salaries to average worker salaries in this country. It's a nearly unbelievable social phenomenon. This is the top 100 CEOs of the Fortune 500, the most highly paid, versus average workers. And you can see that the ratio went from something around 30 to something around 800 times from the 1970s till now. This country became a ripoff. And the ripoff is made at the very top. It's made by CEOs that are earning tens of millions or even hundreds of millions of dollars. I sat next to somebody who signed his compensation check for himself last year, sat next to him a few weeks ago for $5 billion. One of the hedge fund masters who played the game, in my opinion, of misleading markets during the build-up of the subprime and the collapse of the subprime bubble, played the game, gamed against the markets, and took home several $billion for his actions. But this kind of compensation is unique to the United States. It's shocking and it's new. It came within the last quarter century. It really started in the mid-1980s when CEOs with their friendly compensation committees began to pay themselves in the form of stock options worth vast sums, really out of the control of the shareholders and with the encouragement of the IRS, the politicians, and so forth, who viewed these as their allies in the political terrain. What this has meant for income inequality is really quite stunning. This is the share of income taken by the top 0.01% of households. So that's the top 1% of 1%. There are 13,000 households in that category in the United States. Those 13,000 households have about 5 to 6% of all household income. The top 1/10,000 of households has about 5% of the income. That is more income than the poorest 24 million households in the United States. That's the game, 13,000 versus 24 million. And who do you think has the political voice? Only those at the top, not the bottom 25 million. These are the ones that get their tax breaks, that have their tax-free havens, that have all of the power, and that, of course, pay for the campaigns. This top graph is the income share of the top 1%. And by the way, what I meant to say is that this goes back to 1913. It's wonderful data by two economists, Sachs and Piketty, who have painstakingly recalibrated the income levels of the richest households in America. And you see that before the Great Depression, which began right here in 1929, the income inequality was high. The Great Depression came, the New Deal, World War II, the post-war period of high taxation of wealth meant a long period of relatively lower inequality. And then starting with globalization, tax cuts, Ronald Reagan, this inequality built up. It came fairly uniformly through Democratic and Republican administrations. There's just not much difference between them. If you look at the top 1% of households, their share of income has risen from about 10%, actually about 9% in 1979, to more than 20% today. This is a stunning transfer of, or stunning reflection of the fact that our growth of national income has all gone to the top. And those who are watching in disbelief and feeling the income squeeze among the bottom 60 or 80% of America's households are only dimly aware of this incredible reality of where the income gains have actually accrued. Now, of course, as the share of income of the rich was rising, that's the red line, the average tax take from the rich was falling. Those are the tax cuts that have been put in place repeatedly since 1981. When Ronald Reagan started the tax cutting, this has now gone on through all of our governments. So the effective tax burden of the rich has declined from about a third of their income to something around 15% of the income of this top 1% now. Income tax at the bottom also diminished. So it's often said that the rich pay a very large share of the federal income tax. That's true. But the actual effective tax rate has declined significantly, and the net of tax income of the rich has risen by probably around 10 percentage points of GNP. Astounding for the top 1% of the households. So while the income tax on the bottom half was largely eliminated, actually, the huge gains of net income are all at the top. And the higher tax share paid by the rich doesn't mean a higher tax rate. The higher tax share actually has gone along with a lower tax rate on the rich. And so the net of tax income has soared for the wealthy. Same with corporate income tax. This is another